Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read older books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can to try and help slow your spinning mind, enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you drift away. But before you do drift away, I'd like to ask you, if you find Sleepy Time Tales useful and you would like to support me and help me keep it going out to thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider taking a look at the Patreon and seeing if you would be interested in supporting there. You can find it at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. You can support for as little as $2 a month. $5 a month gets you some pretty cool stuff. And there is also a 7-day free trial of the $5 a month level. So if you want to check it out, feel free to sign up and take a look. And if monthly is a bit much, you can also put a tip in the tip jar. These options are linked in the show notes. Or you can also support Sleepy Time Tales by simply spreading the word. If you know someone who struggles to get a good night's sleep, just tell them about it and see where it goes from there. And now, let's help you get back to sleep, where this classic proto-sci-fi will take a bit of a warlock turn. It's an interesting one. Enjoy. We return this week to the description of a new world called the Blazing World by the Duchess of Newcastle, Margaret Cavendish. Thus the Duchess's soul, after she had taken leave of the Empress, as also of the spirits, who with great civility promised her that they would endeavour in time to make a peace and agreement between Fortune and the Duke, returned with prudence and honesty into her own world. But when she was just upon her departure, the Empress sent to her, and desired that she might yet have some little conference with her before she went, which the Duchess most willingly granted her Majesty. And when she came to wait on her, the Empress told the Duchess that she, being her dear platonic friend, of whose just and impartial judgment she had always a very great esteem, could not forbear before she went from her to ask her advice concerning the government of the Blazing World. For, said she, although this world was very well and wisely ordered and governed at first, when I came to be Empress thereof, yet the nature of women being much delighted with change and variety, after I had received an absolute power from the Emperor, did somewhat alter the form of government from what I found it. But now perceiving that the world is not so quiet as it was at first, I am much troubled at it. Especially there are such continual contentions and divisions between the worm, bear, and fly men, the ape men, the satyrs, the spider men, and all others of such sorts, that I fear they'll break out into an open rebellion and cause a great disorder, and the ruin of the government. And therefore I desire your advice and assistance. How may I order it to the best advantage, that this world may be rendered peaceable, quiet, and happy, as it was before? Whereupon the Duchess answered, that since she heard by her Imperial Majesty how well and happily the world had been governed when she first came to be Empress thereof, she would advise her Majesty to introduce the same form of government again, which had been before. That is, to have but one sovereign, one religion, one law, and one language, so that all the world might be but as one united family, without divisions, nay, like God and his blessed saints and angels. Otherwise, said she, it may in time prove as unhappy, nay, as miserable a world as that is from which I came, wherein are more sovereigns than worlds, and more pretended governors than government, more religions than gods, and more opinions in those religions than truths, more laws than rights, and more bribes than justices, more policies than necessities, and more fears than dangers, more covetousness than riches, more ambitions than merits, more services than rewards, more languages than wit, more controversy than knowledge, more reports than noble actions, and more gifts by partiality than according to merit. All which, said she, is a great misery, nay, a curse, which your blessing, blazing world never knew, nor 'tis probable will never know of, unless your imperial majesty alter the government thereof, from which it was when you began to govern it. And since your majesty complains much of the factions of the bear, fish, fly, ape and worm men, the satyrs, the spider-men, and the like, and of their perpetual disputes and quarrels, I would advise your majesty to dissolve all their societies, for it is better to be without intelligences than to have an unquiet and disorderly government. The truth is, said she, wheresoever learning is, there is most commonly also controversy and quarrelling. For there be always some that will know more, and be wiser than others. Some think their arguments come nearer to truth, and they are more rational than others. Some are so wedded to their own opinions that they'll never yield to reason, and others, though they find their opinions not firmly grounded upon reason, yet for fear of receiving some disgrace by altering them, will nevertheless maintain them against all sense and reason, which must needs breed factions in their schools, which at last break out into open wars, and draw sometimes an utter ruin upon a state or government. The Empress told the Duchess that she would willingly follow her advice, but she thought it would be an eternal disgrace to her to alter her own decrees, acts, and laws. To which the Duchess answered that it was so far from a disgrace as it would rather be for Her Majesty's eternal honour to return from a worse to a better, and would express and declare her to be more than ordinary wise and good. So wise as to perceive her own errors, and so good as not to persist in them, which few did. For which, said she, you will get a glorious fame in this world, and an eternal glory hereafter, and I shall pray for it so long as I live. Upon which advice the Empress's soul embraced and kissed the Duchess's soul with an immaterial kiss, and shed immaterial tears, that she was forced to part from her, finding her not a flattering parasite, but a true friend. And in truth, such was their platonic friendship, as these two loving souls did often meet and rejoice in each other's conversation. The second part of the description of the new blazing world. The Empress, having now ordered and settled her government to the best advantage and quiet of her blazing world, lived and reigned most happily and blessedly, and received oftentimes visits from the immaterial spirits, who gave her intelligence of all such things as she desired to know, and they were able to inform her of. One time they told her how the world she came from was embroiled in a great war, and that most parts or nations thereof made war against that kingdom which was her native country, where all her friends and relations did live, at which the Empress was extremely troubled, insomuch that the Emperor perceived her grief by her tears, and examining the cause thereof, she told him that she had received intelligence from the spirits, that that part of the world she came from, which was her native country, was like to be destroyed by numerous enemies that made war against it. The Emperor, being very sensible of this ill news, especially of the trouble it caused to the Empress, endeavoured to comfort her as much as possibly he could, and told her that she might have all the assistance which the blazing world was able to afford. She answered that if there was any possibility of transporting forces out of the blazing world into the world she came from, she would not fear so much the ruin thereof. But, said she, there being no probability of effecting any such thing, I know not how to show my readiness to serve my native country. The Emperor asked whether those spirits that gave her intelligence of this war could not with all their power and forces assist her against those enemies. She answered that the spirits could not arm themselves, nor make any use of artificial arms or weapons, for their vehicles were natural bodies, not artificial. Besides, said she, the violent and strong actions of war will never agree with immaterial spirits, for immaterial spirits cannot fight, nor make trenches, fortifications, and the like. But, said the Emperor, their vehicles can, especially if those vehicles be men's bodies. They may be serviceable in all the actions of war. Alas, replied the Empress, that will never do. For first, said she, it will be difficult to get so many dead bodies for their vehicles as to make up a whole army, much more to make many armies to fight with so many several nations. Nay, if this could be, yet it is not possible to get so many dead and undissolved bodies in one nation, and for transporting them out of other nations, it would be a thing of great difficulty and improbability. But put the case, said she, all these difficulties could be overcome. Yet there is one obstruction or hindrance which can no ways be avoided. For those whose dead and undissolved bodies did all die in 1 minute of time, yet before they could rendezvous and put into a posture of war, to make a great and formidable army, they would stink and dissolve, and when they came to a fight they would moulder into dust and ashes, and so leave the purer, immaterial spirits naked. Nay, were it also possible that those dead bodies should be preserved from stinking and dissolving, yet the souls of such bodies would not suffer immaterial spirits to rule and order them, but they would enter and govern them themselves, as being the right owners thereof, which would produce a war between those immaterial souls and the immaterial spirits in material bodies, all of which would hinder them from doing any service in the actions of war against the enemies of my native country. You speak reason, said the Emperor, and I wish with all my soul I could advise any manner or any way that you might be able to assist it. But you have told me of your dear platonic friend, the Duchess of Newcastle, and of her good and profitable counsels. I would desire you to send for her soul and confer with her about this business. The Empress was very glad of this motion of the Emperor, and immediately sent for the soul of the said Duchess, which in a minute waited on her Majesty. Then the Empress declared to her the grievance and sadness of her mind, and how much she was troubled and afflicted at the news brought her by the immaterial spirits, desiring the Duchess, if possible, to assist her with the best counsel she could, that she might show the greatness of her love and affection, which she bore to her native country. Whereupon the Duchess promised her Majesty to do what lay in her power, and since it was a business of great importance, she desired some time to consider of it. For, said she, great affairs require deep considerations, which the Empress willingly allowed her. And after the Duchess had considered some little time, she desired the Empress to send some of her sirens, or mermen, to see what passages they could find out of the blazing world, into the world she came from. For, said she, if there be a passage for a ship to come out of that world into this, then certainly there may be also a ship pass through the same passage out of this world into that. Hereupon the mer, or fishmen, were sent out, who being many in number, employed all their industry, and did swim several ways. At last, having found out the passage, they returned to the Empress and told her that as their blazing world had but one emperor, one government, one religion, and one language, so there was but one passage into that world, which was so little that no vessel bigger than a packet boat could go through. Neither was that passage always open, but sometimes quite frozen up, at which the relation both the Empress and Duchess seemed somewhat troubled, fearing that this would perhaps be a hindrance or obstruction to their design. At last the Duchess desired the Empress to send for her shipwrights and all her architects, which were giants, who being called, the Duchess told them how some in her own world had been so ingenious as to contrive ships that could swim under water, and asked whether they could do the like. The giants answered they had never heard of that invention. Nevertheless, they would try what might be done by art, and spare no labor or industry to find it out. In the meantime, while both the Empress and the Duchess were in a serious council, after many debates, the Duchess desired but a few ships to transport some of the bird, worm, and bear men. Alas, said the Empress, what can such sorts of men do in the other world, especially so few? They will be soon destroyed. for a musket will destroy numbers of birds in one shot. The Duchess said, I desire your Majesty will have but a little patience, and rely upon my advice, and you shall not fail to save your own native country, and in a manner become a mistress of all that world you came from. The Empress, who loved the Duchess as her own soul, did so. The giants returned soon after, and told Her Majesty that they had found out the art which the Duchess had mentioned to make such ships that could swim under water, which the Empress and Duchess were both very glad at. And when the ships were made ready, the Duchess told the Empress that it was requisite that Her Majesty should go herself in body as well in soul. But I, said she, can only wait on your Majesty after a spiritual manner, that is, with my soul. Your soul, said the Empress, shall live with my soul, in my body, for I shall only desire your counsel and advice. Then said the Duchess, Your Majesty must command a great number of your fishmen to wait on your ships, for you know that absence of the sun, as the sun doth when it is present, for that world hath but little blinking stars, which make more shadows than light, and are only able to draw up vapours from the earth, but not to rarefy or clarify them, or to convert them into serene air. The advice of the Duchess was very much approved, and joyfully embraced by the Empress, who forthwith sent her worm men to get a good quantity of the mentioned firestone. She also commanded numbers of fishmen to wait on her under water, and birdmen to wait on her in the air, and bear and worm men to wait on her in ships, according to the Duchess's advice, and indeed the bear men were as serviceable to her as the North Star. But the birdmen would often rest themselves upon the deck of the ships. Neither would the Empress, being of a sweet and noble nature, suffer that they should tire or weary themselves by long flights. For though by land they did often fly out of one country into another, yet they did rest in some woods or on some grounds, especially at night, when it was their sleeping time. And therefore the Empress was forced to take a great many ships along with her, both for transporting those several sorts of her loyal and serviceable subjects, and carry provisions for them. Besides, she was so wearied with the petitions of several others of her subjects, who desired to wait on Her Majesty, that she could not possibly deny them all, for some would rather choose to be drowned than not tender their duty to her. Thus, after all things were made fit and ready, the Empress began her journey. I cannot properly say she set sail, by reason in some part, as in the passage between the two worlds, which yet was but short, the ships were drawn under water by the fishmen with golden chains, so they had no need of sails there, nor of any other arts, but only to keep out water from entering into the ships, and to give or make so much air as would serve for breath or respiration those land animals that were in the ships, which the giants had so artificially contrived, that they which were therein found no inconveniency at all. And after they had passed the icy sea, the golden ships appeared above water, and so went on until they came near the kingdom that was the Empress's native country, where the bear men through their telescopes discovered a great number of ships, which had beset all that kingdom, well rigged and manned. The Empress, before she came in sight of the enemy, sent some of her fish and birdmen to bring her intelligence of their fleet, and hearing of their number, their station and posture, she gave order that when it was night, her birdmen should carry in their beaks some of the mentioned firestones, with the tops thereof wetted, and the fishmen would carry them likewise, and hold them out of the water. For they were cut in the form of torches or candles, and being many thousands made a terrible show, for it appeared as if all the air and sea had been of a flaming fire, and all that were upon the sea or near it did verily believe the time of judgment, or the last day, was come, which made them all fall down and pray. At the break of day the Empress commanded those lights to be put out, and then the naval forces of the enemy perceived nothing but a number of ships without sails, guns, arms, and other instruments of war, which ships seemed to swim of themselves without any help or assistance, which sight put them into a great amaze. Neither could they perceive that those ships were of gold, by reason the Empress had caused them all to be coloured black, with a dark colour, so that the natural colour of the gold could not be perceived through the artificial colour of the paint. No, not by the best telescopes. All which put the enemy's fleet into such a fright at night, and to such wonder in the morning, or at daytime, that they know not what to judge or make of them, for they know neither what ships they were, nor what party they belonged to, insomuch that they had no power to stir. In the meanwhile, the Empress, knowing the colours of her own country, sent a letter to their general and the rest of the chief commanders to let them know that she was a great and powerful princess, and came to assist them against their enemies. Wherefore she desired they should declare themselves, when they would have their help and assistance. Hereupon a council was called, and the business debated. But there were so many cross and different opinions that they could not suddenly resolve what answer to send the Empress, at which she grew angry, insomuch that she resolved to return into her blazing world, without giving any assistance to her countrymen. But the Duchess of Newcastle entreated her Majesty to abate her passion. For, said she, great councils are most commonly slow, because many men have many several opinions. Besides, every counsellor striving to be the wisest makes long speeches, and raise many doubts, which cause retardments. If I had long-speeched counsellors, replied the Empress, I would hang them, by reason they give more words than advice. The Duchess answered that her Majesty should not be angry, but consider the differences of that and her blazing world. For, said she, they are not both alike, but there are grosser and duller understandings in this than in the blazing world. At last a messenger came out, who returned the Empress thanks for her kind proffer, but desired withal to know from whence she came, and how and in what manner her assistance could be serviceable to them. The Empress answered that she was not bound to tell them whence she came, but as for the manner of her assistance, I will appear, said she, to your navy in a splendorous light, surrounded with fire. The messenger asked at what time they should expect her coming. I'll be with you, answered the Empress, about 1 o'clock at night. With this report the messenger returned, which made both the poor counsellors and seamen much afraid, but yet they longed for the time to behold this strange sight. The appointed hour being come, the Empress appeared, with garments made of the star-stone, and was borne or supported above the water, upon the fishmen's heads and backs, so that she seemed to walk upon the face of the water. And the bird and fishmen carried the firestone, alighted both in air and above the waters. Which sight, when her countrymen perceived at a distance, their hearts began to tremble. But coming something nearer, she left her torches, and appeared only in her garments of light, like an angel or some deity, and all kneeled down before her and worshipped her with all submission and reverence. But the Empress would not come nearer than at such a distance where her voice might be generally heard, by reason she would not have that any of her accoutrements should be perceived, but the splendour thereof. And when she was come so near that her voice could be heard and understood by all, she made this following speech. Dear countrymen, for so you are, although you know me not, I being a native of this kingdom, and hearing that most part of this world had resolved to make war against it, and sought to destroy it, at least to weaken its naval force and power, have made a voyage out of another, to lend you my assistance against your enemies. I came not to make bargains with you, or to regard my own interest more than your safety, but I intend to make you the most powerful nation of this world, and therefore I have chosen rather to quit my own tranquillity, riches, and pleasure, than suffer you to be ruined and destroyed. All the return I desire is but your grateful acknowledgment, and to declare my power, love, and loyalty to my native country. For although I am now a great and absolute princess, and empress of a whole world, yet I acknowledge that once I was a subject of this kingdom, which is but a small part of this world. And therefore I will have you undoubtedly believe that I shall destroy your enemies before this following night. I mean those which trouble you by sea. And if you have any by land, assure yourself I shall also give you my assistance against them, and make you triumph over all that seek your ruin and destruction. Upon this declaration of the Empress, when both the general and all the commanders in their several ships had returned their humble and hearty thanks to Her Majesty for so great a favour to them, she took her leave, and departed to her own ships. But good Lord, what several opinions and judgments did this produce in the minds of her countrymen! Some said she was an angel, others she was a sorceress, some believed her a goddess, others said the devil deluded them in the shape of a fine lady. The morning after, when the navies were to fight, the Empress appeared upon the face of the waters, dressed in her imperial robes, which were all of diamonds and carbuncles. In one hand she held a buckler, made of one entire carbuncle, and in the other hand a spear of one entire diamond. On her head she had a cap of diamonds, and just upon the top of the crown was a star made of the star stone mentioned heretofore, and a half moon made of the same stone was placed on her forehead. All her other garments were of several sorts of precious jewels, and giving her fishmen directions how to destroy the enemies of her native country, she proceeded to effect her design. The fishmen were to carrying the firestones in cases of diamonds, for the diamonds in the blazing world are in splendor so far beyond the diamonds of this world, as pebble stones are to the best sort of this world's diamonds. And to uncase or uncover those firestones no sooner but when they were just under the enemy's ships, or close at their sides, and then to wet them and set their ships on fire, which was no sooner done, but all the enemy's fleet was of a flaming fire, and coming to the place where the powder was, it straight blew them up, so that all the several navies of the enemy were destroyed in a short time, which when her countrymen did see, they all cried out with one voice, that she was an angel sent from God, to deliver them out of the hands of their enemies. Neither would she return to the blazing world until she had forced all the rest of the world to submit to that same nation. In the meantime, the general of all their naval forces sent to their sovereign to acquaint him with their miraculous delivery and conquest, and with the Empress's design of making him the most powerful monarch of all that world. After a short time, the Empress sent herself to the sovereign of that nation to know in what she could be serviceable to him, returning her many thanks both for her assistance against his enemies and her kind proffer to do him further service for the good and benefit of his nations, for he was king over several kingdoms, sent her word that although she did partly destroy his enemies by sea, yet they were so powerful that they did hinder the trade and traffic of his dominions. To which the Empress returned this answer, that she would burn and sink all those ships that would not pay him tribute, and forthwith sent to all the neighbouring nations who had any traffic by sea, desiring them to pay tribute to the king and sovereign of that nation where she was born. But they denied it with great scorn, whereupon she immediately commanded her fishmen to destroy all strangers' ships that trafficked on the seas, which they did according to the Empress's command. And when the neighbouring nations and kingdoms perceived her power, they were so discomposed in their affairs and designs that they knew not what to do. At last they sent to the Empress, and desired to treat with her, but could get no other conditions than to submit and pay tribute to the said king and sovereign of her native country. Otherwise she was resolved to ruin all their trade and traffic by burning their ships. Long was this treaty, but in fine they could obtain nothing, so that at last they were forced to submit, by which the king of the mentioned nations became absolute master of the seas, and consequently of that world. By reason, as I mentioned heretofore, the several nations of that world could not well live without traffic and commerce by sea, as well as by land. But after a short time, those neighboring nations, finding themselves so much enslaved that they were hardly able to peep out of their own dominions without a chargeable tribute, they all agreed to join again their forces against the king and sovereign of the said dominions, which when the empress received notice of, she sent out her fishmen to destroy, as they had done before, the remainder of all their naval power, by which they were soon forced again to submit, except some nations which could live without foreign traffic, and some whose trade and traffic was merely by land. These would no ways be a tributary to the mentioned king. The empress sent them word that in case they did not submit to him, she intended to fire all their towns and cities, and reduce them by force to what they would not yield with a good will. But they rejected and scorned her Majesty's message, which provoked her anger so much that she resolved to send her bird and worm men thither, with order to begin first with their smaller towns and set them on fire, for which she was loath to make more spoil than she was forced to do. And if they remained still obstinate in their resolutions to destroy their greater cities. The only difficulty was how to convey the worm men conveniently to those places. But they desired that her Majesty would but set them upon any parts of the earth of those nations, and they could travel within the earth as easily and nimbly as men upon the face of the earth, which the empress did according to their desire. But before both bird and worm men began their journey, the empress commanded the bear men to view through their telescopes what towns and cities those were that would not submit. And having a full information thereof, she instructed the bird and bear men what towns they should begin withal. In the meanwhile, she sent to all princes and sovereigns of those nations to let them know that she would give them a proof of her power, and check their obstinacies by burning some of their smaller towns. And if they continued still in their obstinate resolutions, that she would convert their smaller loss into a total ruin. She also commanded her bird men to make their flight at night, lest they be perceived. At last, when both the bird and worm men came to the designed places, the worm men laid some firestones under the foundation of every house, and the bird men placed some at the tops of them, so that both by rain and by some other moisture within the earth, the stones could not fail of burning. The bird men, in the meantime, having learned some few words of their language, told them that the next time it did rain, the towns would be all on fire, at which they were amazed to hear men speak in the air, but withal they laughed when they heard them say that rain should fire their towns, knowing the effect of water was to quench, not produce fire. At last the rain came, and all upon a sudden their houses appeared of a flaming fire, and the more water there was poured on them, the more they did flame and burn, which struck such a fright and terror into all the neighboring cities, nations, and kingdoms, that for fear the like would happen to them, they and all the rest of the parts of that world granted the empress's desire, and submitted to the monarch and sovereign of her native country, the king of Esvi, save one, which having seldom or never any rain, but only dews, which would soon be spent in a great fire, slighted her power. The empress, being desirous to make it stoop as well as the rest, knew that every year it was watered by a flowing tide, which lasted some weeks, and although their houses stood high from the ground, yet they were built upon supporters, which were fixed into the ground. Whereupon she commanded both her bird and worm men to lay some of the firestones at the bottom of these supporters. And when the tide came in, all their houses were of a fire, which did so rarefy the water, that the tide was soon turned into a vapor, and this vapor again into air, which caused not only a destruction of the houses, but also general barrenness over all their country that year, and forced them to submit, as well as the rest of the world had done. Thus the empress did not only save her native country, but made it the absolute monarchy of all that world, and both the effects of her power and her beauty did kindle a great desire in all the greatest princes to see her, who, hearing that she was resolved to return into her own blazing world, they all entreated the favour that they might wait on her majesty before she went. The empress sent word that she would be glad to grant their requests, but having no other place of reception for them, she desired that they would be pleased to come into the open seas with their ships, and make a circle of a pretty large compass, and then her own ships would meet them and close up the circle, so that she would present herself to the view of all those that came to see her. Which answer was joyfully received by all the mentioned princes, who came, some sooner, some later, each according to the distance of his country and the length of the voyage. And being all met in the form and manner aforesaid, the Empress appeared upon the face of the water in her imperial robes. In some part of her hair near her face she had placed some of the starstone, which added such a lustre and glory to it that it caused a great admiration in all that were present, who believed her to be some celestial creature, or rather an uncreated goddess, and they all had a desire to worship her. For surely, said they, no mortal creature can have such a splendid and transcendent beauty, nor can any have so great a power as she has, to walk upon the waters, and to destroy whatever she pleases, not only whole nations, but a whole world. Okay, this looks like a good place to end it, so I'm going to do that. If you would like to pick up where I am leaving off, you can, as always, find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.